Berkeley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week, I am recording a little early. I don't love how podcasts often go on break over holidays, because I feel like if you're going to be neurotic enough to listen to the podcast in the first place, then you deserve to have an excuse to hide from your family during the holidays. So I am always happy to provide one, but I am doing it a week in advance. I spoke with Cameron about a number of different things. We talk on the main feed. We talk a little bit more about Eliza Gonzalez, specifically about a poem of hers that I found that I quite like. We talk about some different ways of reading, different ways of thinking about poets' lives, whether they are interesting or not. Some questions about the Odyssey, and the degree to which I should or shouldn't feel guilty for this podcast and everything I say on it. On the Secret Show, we get into a lot of other stuff, but I'll just say here that I will wait till the end. But when we recorded this, you may notice my voice sounds a little off right now. It sounded way worse when we recorded this, as you'll hear very soon. So by the time we got to the end, my voice was totally shot, and I meant to reread the Eliza Gonzalez poem after we spoke about it, but at that point you would barely have been able to hear it. So I'm going to go ahead and record it and put it at the end of the episodes. You'll get to hear it there, as well as a little Easter egg I only noticed after the fact that may or may not be a real Easter egg, but I was glad to find it. All right, so here is my conversation with Cameron about reading, guilt, writing, and the difference between dowsing rods and decoder rings. My two big criticisms of this, and it was not really about this woman in particular, but she has this piece we read about Louise Glück, and one of my criticisms was about sentimentality, and I think I stand pretty firmly by that. The other one was I was just confessing a personal frustration with. And this was Glück who does it in her own essay, and she does it much worse than Gonzalez does it at great length in this essay, Education of the Poet, where Glück recounts at length with multiple examples her own childhood precocity, including a poem she wrote as a 5-year-old, which is it a very good poem for a 5-year-old? Totally. Should we be reading it? No. So I just feel like my response is sort of like, we're in a room where everybody's talking about books. Guess what? We were all precocious kids.
Yeah.
And so I just my tolerance for adults speaking at any length or with any seriousness about their precocity is minimal. And what occurred to me, because I looked at some of Gonzalez's other writing, and I did find this poem of hers that I like because I think it does a pretty good job of conveying ambivalence, sincere ambivalence, in a way that the essay did not. That it is probably easier to take precocity for granted or to shrug it off if your environment was such that you were going to be basically okay either way. Where she was extremely poor growing up. She, the first line of this poem, which I think is fairly accurate based on what I've read about her, I came from something popularly known as nothing.
Right.
So the first, I'll just go ahead and read the poem to give you some sense.
Read it.
I think it's pretty good. I don't know if, I think in Elijah's terms, it's probably a prose lyric, but
as all three verses.
Yeah. But I like it, and it does a pretty good job, I think, of triangulating this difficult mixed emotion, called Failed Essay on Privilege by Eliza Gonzalez. I came from something popularly known as nothing, and in the coming I got a lot. My parents didn't speak money, didn't speak college. Still, I went to Yale, For a while, I tried to condemn. I wrote, "Let me introduce you to evil." Still, I was a guest there. I made myself at home. And I know a fine shoe when I see one. And I know to be sincerely sorry for those people's problems. I know to want nothing more than it would be nice to have. And I confess I'll never hate what I've been given as much as I wish I could. Still, I thought I, of all people, understood Aristotle, what is and isn't the good life. Because, I wrote, privilege is an aggressive form of amnesia. I left a house with no heat. I left the habit of hunger. I left a room I shared with 7 brothers and sisters. I also left. Even the good is regrettable, or at least sometimes should be regretted. Yet to hate myself is not to absolve her. I paid so much for wisdom, and look at all of this. Look at all I have. I thought just now the book that my brother and I worked on for a few years for this family. It was kind of a century's family history from a poor tenement house in Poland with no running water to like they're billionaires with houses on multiple continents. And part of what the guy who hired me said he wanted his children to read it and know that what they have wasn't always part of their story, that there was something that came before.
Right.
And so I think I take that as at least part of what she's getting at with privilege is an aggressive form of amnesia. But what occurred to me is that if your childhood was extremely precarious, then precocity was probably like a light in a deeper darkness, and therefore a greater signal of like, oh, there's possibility here where there might not have been.
Well, yes.
So I think is true. But then the follow-up question I have is like, I don't want to like be shitty to anyone or hurt anybody's feelings, but I also then feel like I'm still right to find it like boring and frustrating to hear people talk about that. Like once you then are publishing the Paris Review and you did go to Yale and you are a very celebrated and very successful poet, like it may be that like my reflexive awareness of that as being kind of boring and embarrassing to go on at length about, it may be that I come by that unfairly, but I think I may still be right.
Yes.
But tell me what you think.
Several things.
Please.
I will return to this. Going back one step, I did quite like that poem. Although
I liked it too.
It might have been better if it ended on, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but something like, sometimes the good is regrettable. I'm not sure if the last few lines were worth the sort of abstract, slightly didactic weight they carried, but that's just me.
I do like the very last note, look at all of this, look at all I have.
Yes, another thought I had.
I think some of the steps in between the line you quoted and that line, I think are maybe a little bit. She can't let go of a certain desire to explain, but
no, exactly. And another thought I had while you were reading it was that like I like this poem. I would hate it if I heard it read in what you just defined as the new poetry voice. You know?
Oh, yeah. And I don't think I think she is, that was part of the point of again, the episode hasn't come out yet, but part of the point of the essay is, the episode is that she and Louise Gluck are writing in poetry voice classic. They're writing in the emotionally, drained, kind of cold studied mode. Yeah, and this would be bad in a preacher voice.
In some ways, reading a poem dispassionately, I don't think that's quite the same as reading an old poetry voice, because it wasn't simply it was emotionally drained. It was sort of warped by a kind of, sort of vague spiritual sort of wishy-washiness to the speaker. Like it wasn't just that they spoke unemotionally. They also spoke in a way that like every single sentence was like a gift from sort of the divine, and you have to say it very intensely, but not muddy it with.
And the quality of intoning the words at odds with their denotation, which is kind of the jokey, like you break up the words and you speak them in a tone that is not consistent with what they mean as a speech. That I always read as being a gesture to ensuring that the audience really savor every single word choice,
Right,
which
right, right,
feels
right.
then, I don't know, like a chef telling you how to eat his dessert.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, it sounds sort of egocentric and no, for sure. No, okay. So that's that about the poem.
yeah,
About the general point about precocity, I agree with you. I will, what it communicates to me is not, I guess I'm less sort of annoyed. What it communicates to me is insecurity, like
yeah,
what
yeah,
it
yeah.
communicates to me is like I don't quite believe that my poet I will make a mark enough that scholars will dig up my juvenilia and publish it in my sort of centenary collected poems, so I better do it myself. You know what I mean? Like it
Oh
strikes
God,
me
but
as
you
sort
don't
of
want your juvenilia dug up. That's why you get rid of it.
well, yeah, depending on how
Right.
uh, illuming and delusionally egocentric you are. But yes, but you should. You should. That is the healthier attitude. But like that's what it communicates to me, and that's what sort of sucks about it. That kind of insecurity, that kind of need to do such a thing. It's interesting because I mean, talking of egocentrism, I guess I applied this whole sort of argument to myself. Like because one might be able to make the point that both being blind and growing up with parents who were monetarily certainly of the bourgeois class, but like educationally and in terms of that sort of great sociological word or phrase, I should say, cultural capital. My parents barely read any fucking books and knew no, good, that's hard to say, knew no literature. And I think like one could therefore maybe make the point that and you can tell me to fuck off with this, but like one could maybe make the point that like my precocity, the precocity that I developed, that I could, I don't know, tell you the difference between an anapest and a trochee at the age of like 16, and was like writing stuff in meter, was due to its contextual background, maybe more interesting or maybe or not simply maybe more impressive is the word I'd use, but not even the word that I believe in, but someone I would
Sure,
use
sure.
for
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
making this a point.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
more impressive than like if you or Elijah
Right.
did that at 16,
You
right?
don't expect it, from certain,
Yeah,
if there aren't examples of similar kinds of behavior, you don't expect
sure.
it in a given house. Yeah.
But not this is an abstract point because I think what this ultimately amounts to nothing. Like the
Right.
ultimate case is always, are you going to make good poems? And if
Yeah,
you're going
yeah,
to
yeah.
make good poems, the only thing that's important are the good poems. And if you're not going and that means that however precocious you are at 16 is utterly unimportant compared to the good poems you're making, probably 10 to 15 fucking years later.
Yeah.
And if you don't make any good poems, then that poetic precociosity you showed at 16, apart from being maybe a point of interest to if someone is interested, is utterly meaningless because you didn't ultimately make good poems. So like
Yeah.
like it's something you could talk about, but it's almost certainly one of the least interesting and least important things you will or you should talk about.
This is a tricky thing because there's no, like, an observation that I've made
Yes.
that I won't put anybody else on the hook, but I've talked to other people um, who are also from an educated, middle class background, and they shared the observation that when writers or intellectuals emerged from very unstable or working class backgrounds, there is a tendency in their self-presentation to, again, to have less chill, to be less
Hmm.
able to be kind of gently self-deprecating.
Oh, sure.
They will every diploma, every award, everything is listed in the bio, is posted on the wall, is
Right.
everything is advertised, everything is announced. There's nothing is understated about their
Yes.
achievement. And it feels like, my feeling is twofold. My feeling is like, hey, do what you do. Like that's what you like. If that feels good to you, I wouldn't want to stop you. However, it is worth knowing that people who don't come from that background, in many cases, quietly smirk at that behavior.
Oh, for sure.
And see it as being beneath them, see it as being a show of a lack of class.
Yes.
And I think like that, you know, it's crummy to like dismiss somebody for that reason, because again, like very often these are like extremely impressive, formidable people. But just as a matter of like indications of status and prestige, I think like there are people who do not realize that it is having the opposite effect to the effect that they expect it to have.
Right.
And I think what's also probably true is there are kind of depressive extremes that work in the other direction, right? Like I think there are something that I realize also, like what's also true is it is possible to, like there are a lot of people who will just absolutely take you at your word. And if you tell them like, I'm the foremost poet of my generation, they'll just be like, oh, he's the foremost poet, you know? And so if you're a little bit self-deprecating, you'll be like, oh, well, he ain't shit. Like, well, like, okay, all right. So yeah, I mean, I think what's probably also true is that an understated self-deprecating approach reads differently to people of a different background. So I think it sort of cuts many different ways.
It's sort of we're sort of looking at sort of something like, I don't know, the kind of slight sort of bourgeois depressiveness versus a kind of proletariat insecurity. You know, like that. That's how I read.
So, I mean, again, sweatiness.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like I myself, I fully admit, in many ways very insecure. But like,
we're all insecure. The question is, how do you manifest it?
Exactly.
Except Elijah. He's not insecure.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say, apart, Elijah's been saved and blessed. But no, yes, apart from Elijah, we're all fucked up. That should be the episode title. No, and like will, especially when I'm intoxicated, to people I'm close with, start ranting about, you know, the quote unquote specialness of the things I've achieved, especially in sort of literary terms, because that's one of the very few things in my life that I actually put vast amounts of value in. But like, I hope that I'm self-aware enough to realize that like that is something to be done with people one is close with, you know, because people who one is close with are normally close with you for a reason and can probably tolerate one sort of insecure verbosity. But just to do it generally, I think, is to communicate one's inner problems too vastly and to be slightly naive about the derision and sometimes the cruelty is fair enough, but you know, the derision and cruelty of others. And like, I think one of self-awareness is always, this is an incredibly banal point, but self-awareness I think is always utterly important when dealing with, you know, the general public. There you go. I now feel incredibly depressed. I've just ended this with an incredibly banal point, but that's the banal point.
Yeah, I gotta digest that. I'm not sure. Because I also think like if we're discussing wise strategies for dealing with the general public, then I'm probably gonna drop out of this one because I clearly don't possess any wisdom on that question.
Oh, I disagree, but I mean, I could say the same with my own appearances on this podcast. I certainly haven't dealt with the general public in a very, in a very magnanimous way. You said something.
You treat the audience as a hostile witness on the stand.
You described me. What did you describe me? It was a while ago, but you said I was the Loki of this podcast. Loki and
not which is not the homophonic expression that is a piece of Zoomer slang itself.
Yes, no, not that.
The Nordic god.
The Nordic god, which I was extremely happy. I love that. I love that description. That made me happy for like a week. But
he's a pretty bad god. I mean, he's a crazy god, and he's amazing. Like, he's pretty terrible. Like he's not like a fun jokester. Like his most innocent joke is stealing Sif's hair while she's sleeping. That's his very lightest, most gentle joke. But he also like murders lots of people just like for fun.
Well, I'd rather disassociate myself with stealing people's hair as opposed to murder. So that, that's fine. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all
yeah.
good. Yeah.
That's yeah. I would never steal someone's hair. However,
Duh.
he actually tricks a blind man into murdering his own brother.
Oh, fair enough. That sounds funny. I'd do the
Yeah,
same.
that's the one that they can't quite forgive. That's when he gets in real shit over.
Nah, I get
Yeah.
it. I get it. No, I'm joking. But yeah. Um,
So yeah, so you disambiguated some slang. We
uh,
discussed Eliza Gonzalez's. Yeah, I think I don't feel any chagrin about telling her that if you're going to be a writer, if you're going to write in public in an occasion of mourning, this is the moment. You're the first responder on this question. It is your job
mhm.
to manage tone and not be maudlin and not be sentimental.
So she was maudlin and sentimental.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
that
very,
was
very
okay.
sentimental.
Okay.
And I think Jonathan's response was like, "Hey, her friend had just died, her mentor and friend." And my response is like, "Well, that's an occasion to be very sad for. But what you're talking about is writing about sorrow in public. And
Right.
once you're doing that, like that's like saying the fireman was afraid of the fire. Well, of course he was. We're all afraid of fire, but his job is to be a fucking firefighter.
And and
And if you're a
and for
writer, like your job is to, when somebody's getting married, when somebody's dying, like in weird, challenging moments, it's your job to have something credible and moving to say that doesn't fall into the traps that ordinary people's speech falls into on those heavily emotional occasions.
yeah, no, for sure. And I
Um,
think I think there's a further point that, Gluck, as a writer, wants herself to be judged by the general public, or she doesn't even want herself to be judged by the general public. She wants her art to be judged by the general public. And one's friend, one can be extremely grief-stricken for the death of one's friend. But as you say, when it comes to this public occasion of writing, one is not even writing. I mean, one is kind of writing about Gluck because she is dead, but one is also writing as much about the things she produced because that's the things that she wanted to
yeah,
live
it was
in the
both
mind
as
of
a
the general
person and a poet,
public.
person, poet,
Yeah,
teacher, all of these. Yeah.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly. So no, I
yeah.
agree. Even
And
though
I
I
mean,
haven't
and,
read
and I would say
anything
the same.
this time,
I
this
used the
month.
example of my cousin's very good eulogy for her father, which was moving and not at all sentimental, like moving and very funny and more touching for being not maudlin. Um,
Mm.
but then on the other question, which is, I gave her a hard time for reciting and rehearsing her own precocity as a child, though not nearly as much as Glick did. Glick was way worse about it.
Oh,
And I gave her grief. I gave both of them grief for that. And I think probably my revised take is it it is more understandable because precocity is a much bigger deal if you come from genuinely hard circumstances. But once you have arrived, it's still pointless to talk about.
for sure. I mean, okay, let me also add that, like, I don't think I fully, either I just didn't listen or it wasn't fully explained, but I don't think I fully realized that she was taught, and I don't mean, well, what's this woman's name again? Remind me.
Eliza Gonzalez. Yeah, she
Eliza
studied at
Gonzalez.
Yale with Glick. Yeah.
Okay.
And they
But
were
I didn't
pretty
realize
good friends,
she was
apparently.
discussing her precocity in a piece on
Well,
the
the piece
occasion of
was like
Gluck's
my
death.
joke, my other mean joke was they found somebody to write about Glick who took herself as seriously as Glick did, right? Because they like, I mean, again, in poet, like when Glick's writing about the education of the poet, she basically all she can do is just write about herself in a way that doesn't actually apply to anybody else. And Gonzalez similarly just wrote endlessly. Like both of them had no sense of humor about themselves at all.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
uh,
I will say,
yeah,
I mean, I will say this. I think talent is cruel in both in its undemocraticness, but I think in the way it sort of allows us to forgive others. Because, like, say, in 50 years, everyone, the poetic canon is sort of, enraptured with this woman as well as Clark. And she's dead or something. Maybe in 100 years, and we're reading her stuff. Then I think because of her positioning, we will become so much more interested in when she talks about herself autobiographically, right?
yeah.
Even when in an inappropriate occasion, as for instance in the sort of discussion of another writer's death. but that is all coming from the fact that like talent existed strongly enough within her that she made great enough art that like her personal descriptions become of psychological interest to us. And that's never something one can assume about oneself. So in this way, I think we in both of us are generally completely correct in dismiss or slightly attacking or critiquing the
Yeah.
sort of self-centeredness in this way. But there will be, and there have been, and there will be writers who will do this, and ultimately people will be happy that they did this because they were talented enough that that detail will become of interest. But the truth is that those writers make up like a 0.01%, or even like, probably even an even smaller statistic of all the people who write, and therefore we are almost we are always almost entirely going to be correct when we say that this kind of autobiographical praise in this kind of occasion is utterly is incorrect and ill-informed, right?
Yeah. I also, I have to confess, and this is probably just a deep character flaw in myself. I confess I have almost perfect incuriosity about the personal histories of poets. Like I think of
Oh,
like
yeah.
the Hayden Carruth poem. He says, "I wouldn't visit the grave of Shakespeare if I lived just down the street." But I feel a little bit like what I do enjoy is when there is a good anecdote, like when
Yeah.
there's a good story about somebody's life. I love hearing those and collecting those, but I have no like curiosity that drives me to go investigate the histories and lives of poets.
Oh,
So
okay. Well,
like, which
this
is why
isn't
like, I love Eudora Welty, but reading one writer's beginnings, I realized like, oh shit, she just took them at their word and she just wrote out what her childhood was. This is fucking awful.
Okay, but
Um,
I don't think your flaw is as big as you think because I kind of shared. So let me be slightly more specific. I'm very interested in reading about the personalities and behaviors of poets I'm in love with, and I'm in love with their writing. I'm not interested at all in autobiography.
right.
I think I read like, oh God, maybe one biography. I've read a biography of Keats, and that might be the only biography of a writer I've ever read. But like, I'm utterly uninterested in learning about like facts or details. I'm very interested in learning about what they were like as people. That fascinates me. But like the events, I'm completely bored with, and I just no, I don't. Biographies completely bore me. So, I mean, I'm still, I guess, different from you, but maybe not as gapingly different as I first may have seemed.
Yeah. The only, I think for me, it's like I was reading a manuscript today, not a manuscript, an arc. And I read the first five poems just to see like, all right, what do we do? I actually I read two arcs today, or I started two arcs today. One of them,
Sorry, what are
oh,
arcs
I'm
in
sorry,
this?
advanced review copy.
Okay,
So
okay.
these were both digital, but I in both of them I read the first several poems. In one of them I thought like, oh, this is interesting. Like, okay, I'm gonna actually take some time and read this whole thing, and like I'm curious what this is, and this seems like this could be. I like some of this already. The other one I read the first five poems. They were perfectly fine, totally unremarkable, left no impression, and I knew I
Hmm.
wasn't interested after the first five poems. But then I made a point of saying like, I'm going to go ahead and read the last poem as well, which is sort of
Uh,
always it's like I'm so I think my one exception is I'm always interested to hear what somebody's last words were, and I will always at least read the last poem of the book.
uh-huh.
Um, but I didn't read the last poem of the other book because I knew like, oh, I actually want to read this whole book. But yeah, generally speaking, it is so hard for me to work up any care to read about the details of somebody's
Mm,
life. Like
yeah.
again, it is it is like my interest in biography tends to be really an interest in like world historical figure. Like
Right, right,
I
right,
don't know.
right.
Like I was interested in Albert Speer's biography because he was the number two man in the Third Reich. Like he had an extremely historically consequential life and like did a lot of evil and was like, yeah, like that's it. That I'm interested in. Uh,
But your
Ordinary people, like
disinterest
writers. I
extends
feel
to
like if you're a writer, you're mostly not really living an interesting life. You're writing
but
instead.
does your disinterest extend to writers' personalities?
Mm, the thing I care about is so much the work that like
Yeah.
I don't know how much of a sense of the personality I get. It's honestly, it's not so different from the way I feel about actors. Like, there are actors I really, really like, and the ones who tend to be good to interview tend to be the ones that are actually either comedians or writers. And if they're comedians, what that is to say, they're writers, right? Because that's what all
Hmm.
comedians are, writers at some level.
Sure, sure.
Um, and they are often interesting in interviews. But like Rebecca Ferguson, very like great contemporary writer or sorry actor. Really like her. She's one of the lead roles in the House of Dynamite, which we're watching. She was in Dune. She's amazing in that. She's like, I will confess to you, and I guess the secret to at this point, if ever there were an adaptation of the book I'm querying right now, she would be like a dream choice for the lead. And partly what I like about her is that she reads as intelligent. Watching an interview with her, I thought like, oh, this was a mistake. The same with Paul Giamatti. Paul Giamatti is an amazing actor, and
Yeah,
still similarly like reads is very intelligent. In interviews, I don't think they're stupid, but it's like they're kind of empty vessels. Like they're
yeah,
energetic and they're shticky and they are kind of cute, but like there's not like no. What you want is for a writer to write their words and then for them to deliver them. And with
yeah,
writers, I feel almost the way Socrates felt. Like I know you best when you're writing at your best.
yeah,
Like, do I want like who's the real Flannery O'Connor? The Flannery O'Connor who's writing Good Country People, or the Flannery O'Connor who like made racist jokes at a party?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I don't, I just, not that it doesn't matter what you do in your personal life, it certainly matters, but I don't, I'm not interested in that really very
yeah.
much. Again,
I mean,
there are great, like, part of what makes poets in their youth really good is not that I'm getting the down low on Robert Lowell and John Berryman. It's that Eileen Simpson is a really good gossiper and storyteller. And so
yeah,
she just does a great job of like dishing on all this just interesting stories, interesting gossip, interesting experiences. They could, it could be a novel and it would be just as fun.
yeah. I mean, well, basically, the English writer uh, Rachel Cusk did that with a book about D.H. Lawrence, a memoir about a memoir by a woman. I was I forgot her name, but a woman, sort of literary figure in sort of the 30s and 20s who ran like an artist retreat, wrote a book about D.H. Lawrence coming and staying there, and basically what like a fucking like crazy piece of shit, terrible, insane person he was to like, host. But the novelist Rachel Cusk wrote a book called Second Place about a woman who runs an artist retreat and has a painter called Elle come round. And like the novel is just like a rewriting and sort of dramatization, sort of psychologicalization, if I can invent a word,
Yeah.
of that memoir. And like, that I think has similar energy. But yeah, I mean, what you say, Howard Bloom would say that you're interested in sort of the writer's demonic self. If you want to make it mystical, the self scrap of like God
Why did he
that
get so
like
mystical?
produces art.
What is all that nonsense about? I don't get that. I don't get that impulse. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I really fucking do, but I'll restrain
All right.
myself for you. I'll stop ranting. I won't go
No,
on my
I mean,
rant about.
I'll listen to some of it. I just don't understand the, yeah.
I don't.
Sorry, go
I guess
ahead.
like a difference I've been making in my head recently, and this is sort of very much my own definitionalism here, is that like, okay, let me make several. Okay, let me make several preliminary statements. A, I am not a Christian in that I don't believe in an all-loving God. B, when I talk about divinity, I am not talking about it in a way that would ever imply the existence of an all-loving God, nor a God that is, takes an active interest and love of every single human life in the way that sort of particularly Christians, but often most of the fucking religions do. But if I had to make any sort of statements about my own belief, I might say that if I were to believe in the divine, I guess like in some way, and certainly not in the all loving manner, but in some way, I guess like sometimes I think the difference between what I might call my soul and myself. is that like myself is, me, like the identity I have, all of me, the personality, the consciousness, created in my mind, right? But I guess I would say that the thing that makes me write, the thing that drives me to write on an almost instinctual level, and the way in which sometimes I feel like the poems I'm writing aren't even like are sort of transferred to me instead of purely made up by me. I guess I might say that the thing that does that is part of me. I might not even say I might not immediately go to religion, but I guess I would like slightly sanctify or like slightly say it's a part of me, a superior part of me to the rest of me, but it isn't me in that it isn't just myself. And I guess if I was going to use a very, very fucking loaded and suspicious word, I might say that like if I were to believe in a soul, I would not believe in it as a kind of as like just my personality or my mind or my consciousness that exists after death or whatever. But I might believe that like it is that drive to make art or the thing making the art that is like inside of me, but certainly isn't me in that like it isn't just, it isn't fully my personality or myself. And I think like Bloom would call it like the demon, and he would sort of take it as also maybe the daemon, if you want to use Greek terminology, but like would talk it as a sort of internal mystical force that produces art through like, the fallen constellation of the human self. And I have a lot of time for that, but like, yeah, there you go. There's my irritatingly mystical and extremely vague to probably the point of non-meaning speculation.
Yeah, I think I feel fairly similarly, but I frame it a little bit differently. I think, if I use a mythical term, I would use the word muse, but
Uh-huh.
there's also, I think there's a little bit of an artifact of a slight misappropriation of technical terminology that has caused, I think, a distortion in how we think about this psychological question. So
Sure.
Freud, it, didn't develop all of his theories all at once. He developed them over time, and he adjusted them. And at one brief moment, he used the term subconscious to refer to like one stratum of the mind,
Uh-huh.
like one sort of
Interesting.
specific part of the mind. But then he disposed of that term. Even when he did briefly use it, he did not mean unconscious, which is the term he ended up sticking with. He meant a much smaller part of the mind than that. He meant like what's just like subliminal, like what's just below the consciousness. Um, the unconscious, I think everybody today says subconscious instead of unconscious in popular conversation, right? What I think that ends up meaning in a quiet way is it diminishes what the referent, right? Sub meaning like a below, and it ends up being like the subconscious in popular conversation is like the dirty secret, the telltale heart. It's like what's just under the floorboards,
Right,
right? It's like,
right, right.
oh, it's the porn you hide under your mattress, right? Like
Yes.
the subconscious is understood as being basically um, a, a base impulse that you
Yes.
conceal from yourself. And so
Yes.
the subconscious is sort of understood to be like the horny ape under
Right,
the
right, right,
surface,
right,
and then
right.
we as like conscious civilized adults kind of contend with that a little bit. But that's a in misnaming it, they have misconceived it, because the real question is not what is the tension between your conscious mind and the the little level, the little layer of sort of obvious dirty secrets that you're just barely, denying to yourself. No, like even when we talk about denial, that is not the unconscious. Like even if you've
Uh-huh.
successfully denied something to yourself to the point where you barely believe it happened,
Right.
even that is still just the upper layer of the unconscious.
Uh-huh.
The figure he uses, I if I it is either the figure he uses or it's the figure I mondegreened from the end of Interpretation of Dreams, it's so indelible to me, is that your consciousness, your conscious mind is a spotlight, and your unconscious is the ocean.
Mm.
So
Yes.
it is an unfathomably vast part of you, almost all of you,
Mm.
almost your entire mind, with the exception of this tiny little bright sliver. And
Mm.
you have some ability to direct the sliver, but only across the surface.
Mm.
And there's certain
Yes.
parts you will never even come close to penetrating. And so it's not just that, like, yes, is there some horny dirtiness under that surface? Sure. But that's like saying that the unconscious is sharks. Well,
Right,
no.
right, right.
There are plenty of sharks in it, but like that's just the tiniest part of what's there. And
Right.
so I very much believe that the unconscious is responsible for most really good writing. And I think that we have some ability with our conscious habits to cultivate a good rhythm, a good relationship, a consistent opportunity for, tapping into that. But it is absolutely a mystery to us. We
Mm.
are fundamentally mysteries to ourselves. And I'm a great fan of the conscious mind, but it is really, really puny by comparison.
Yeah, for sure.
So no, I mean, I don't think of it in terms of a daemon, but I think if you are not overwhelmed, like even if you're a total atheist, if you're not overwhelmed by the vastness of how much you don't know yourself, then you're in denial, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I think I like the ocean especially as a metaphor for that, considering I think if this pop science fact is still true. But considering that we know less about the sort of parts at the bottom of the ocean than we do about the surface of the moon, I
Totally,
do like that
totally,
as a
yeah.
metaphor for that. But yeah. Hello. Okay.
Hey,
I'm back.
I will resign. See if I could get away with playing a game of chess. Uh, this guy's playing too slow. All right, never mind. So yeah, and probably don't really have time, but I am sort of chewing over this idea of two ways of reading after listening to Ryan's essay at the LCW, and then I had a nice kind of exchange of voice notes with Ethan today, both
Uh-huh.
about that essay and about kind of the Odyssey more broadly. And it occurred to me that there is like that when I listen to some people talk about how they read, it's often extremely impressive, but it is like almost perfectly backwards to the way I read. And I suspect the way that it's again it's backwards and superior. But the figure I came up with was that I read with a dowsing rod and they read with a decoder ring. Um,
Okay.
and that
Explain that a
and the
little.
distinction being, I mean, both were sort of like laughable objects, but that like I think a lot of very well-read scholarly people will read with an eye to interpretation,
Uh-huh.
and once they have sort of solved what is going on, then they respond personally and emotionally. Like
Oh,
once they've kind of
interesting.
like drawn out what it all stands for, what it all means,
Oh,
then they and
I,
what it all connects
huh.
to, and then they sort of like look at what is revealed, and what is revealed to them produces an effect. To me, that's reading with a decoder ring. It also means like you
Right.
being really knowledgeable. And for me, I
Huh.
read with a dowsing rod, meaning I pay attention to my response, and then I follow that response in order to learn more.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like I
Okay.
wait for the stick to wobble, and then that's
Yeah.
where I dig, rather than
Right.
rather than doing the decoding first and then reading the message. Right.
Right. Okay. I see. No, I'm certainly more with your style of reading than the first, actually. I don't The first seems very alien to me when I
But I
think
don't but I
about
don't
it.
think it's necessarily uncommon. Um,
Mm.
like, and the example and again, like Elijah was quoting an extremely, venerable scholar who's like, I will not attempt to paraphrase, but the sort of the general idea he referred to was there's the moment in the Odyssey when um, Odysseus is at the Isle of Circe, and the first group of men go, and um, Eurylochus comes back, and he says, "Oh man, oh man, oh man!" They all got. Does he say they all got turned into swine, or does he just say they all went in and none of them came? I think he says they all went in and none of them came back. And so he says, you got to just let I was scared. She invited them in. I was scared, so I didn't go in. They all went in. None of them came out. So I ran away, and now I'm running back to you. And now let's get the fuck out of here. And he says, I don't want you to go because I'm afraid you won't come out either.
Right.
There's something wrong with this place.
Yeah.
And Odysseus says, you relax, have something to eat. And then he says, I'm reading in the Robert Fitzgerald translation. He says, I turned and left him, this is Odysseus narrating. I turned and left him, left the shore and ship, and went up through the woodland hushed and shady to find the subtle witch in her long hall. So he goes, he's like, fuck it, I'm going to go. I'm going to go see what's going on. But Hermes met me with his golden wand, barring the way. A boy whose lip was downy in the first bloom of manhood, so he seemed. He took my hand and spoke as though he knew me. And then Hermes has the speech, which Fitzgerald puts in rhyming octaves, in tetrameter octaves. And is it, I don't know, maybe rhyme royal. I don't remember my rhyme schemes. But Hermes says basically like, okay, so here's the deal. She is changing she's changing all of these men into animals. She's unmanning them, and she's going to do the same thing to you by poisoning your drink. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a special charm that will protect you, so you can drink the drink and it won't affect you. And then I want you to whip your sword out and threaten to kill her, and then she will be afraid. Here, I'll read the last stanza. He says, let instant death upon it shine, it being the blade, like show that you're going to kill her. And she will cower and yield her bed, a pleasure you must not decline. So may her lust and fear bestead you and your friends, and break her spell. But make her swear by heaven and hell no witch's tricks, or else your harness shed, you'll be unmanned by her as well. And so he says, like, take this charm, you have to use it, and then you have to do what I say, and you'll get your men back. And then he draws this root, this flower. So it's a plant. He bent down glittering for the magic plant and pulled it up, black root and milky flower, a moly in the language of the gods, fatigue and pain for mortals to uproot, but gods do this and everything with ease. So both the scholar that Ethan was citing, whom I will not attempt to summarize, I've not read, I understood Ethan's summary as well as I could, but the idea was that it was significant that when he pulled this root, and this is apparently like only immortals can draw this plant up from there. If humans attempt to pull it up, it'll hurt or kill them. The moly flower or the moly herb, and it's significant that it's black below and white above. It's sort of both and. It's both the below and the above. It's both in one unit. And Ryan's whole thesis was about how the struggle of the Odyssey is the struggle neither to try to float up into godhood nor to descend into beasthood, but to remain the kind of the whole man of both. Both.
It's a nice thesis.
Yeah, it's a great thesis, great paper. Definitely should read it. Really, really brilliant and like fun, exciting to read. It reads like a whodunit. But so then the point here was Ethan was saying like when. So he takes this plant and he uses it, and he takes her drink, drinks it, and then she comes forward with her wand and she says, "Down in the sty and snore among the rest." And that was kind of the cue with her spell where she could turn them into swine when she did this with her wand. And he says, "Without a word, I drew my sharpened sword and in one bound held it against her throat. She cried out, then slid under to take my knees, catching her breath to say in her distress, 'What champion of what country can you be?'" So he overpowers her with a sword. She yields. She cowers, just like Hermes says, and she offers her bed. And he sleeps with her, and he gets his men back. One might use a word, other than sleeps with, depending, given the context. But the symbolic interpretation here is that he was, by listening to the god and taking the moly flower, which is sort of both above and below, he then kind of inhabits a full manhood that, that's neither the beasthood of his men nor the godhood of Hermes, but this sort of happy medium.
Sure.
And he retains his, he sort of, this is one more demonstration of his being whole and a complete man. And this is again, like, for Ryan, this was very much interpreted as a moral, as like,
Uh-huh.
and this is how one should be. And I think all of that is brilliant and amazing, and I think it's awesome. It
Hmm.
also is totally against the grain of my reading, and I understand. I think that Greek audiences would have read this differently, and
Yeah.
they would not be scandalized, say, by a man putting a woman at the edge of a blade and then having sex with her, the way we are. But
Hmm.
I also, even if I put myself in that frame of mind, what I feel basically, I remember reading this as a kid, and I loved reading this as a kid. Loved rereading this. I think I just love this translation. I love his
Hmm.
Homer and his Virgil, and I'm sure
Have you read the
all the
newest one?
translators will groan. But my feeling was, well, he's doing what he has to do to save his
Yeah.
men. That's what's most important to him. But like,
Mm.
this is incredibly cruel and vicious,
Yeah.
and she's cruel and vicious. Does she deserve better? No, probably not. But it's not a moment in which I see his nobility. It's a moment in which I see his ruthlessness. And it's a
Yeah.
ruthlessness that, I mean, I'm on his side. I'm the reader. I'm on the Odyssey with him.
Right. Right.
And I'm glad he saves his men. But I felt it as a reader, I felt in that moment a hardening both of his heart and of mine.
Yeah.
And I think in a kind of in a cold, descriptive way, I I understand this interpretation of this moly flower being a kind of a totem of manhood, in contrast
Mm.
to, not in contrast to womanhood, but in contrast to godhood and animalhood. But I I think to read, like, what definitely Ryan, less so Bernadetti, the guy Ethan was paraphrasing, whom again I can't account for, and to a slightly greater degree than Bernadetti, but maybe less than Ryan, Ethan, they seem very much to take they sort of, the intellectual response comes first, and that actually supersedes that emotional response, in the same way
Ah.
that like Ryan would say, like, well, when you read the Aeneid, you understand that it is what is called for and pious for Aeneas to leave Dido and to go found Rome. It is also incredibly cruel and cold-hearted, and she is totally fucked. She's not just overreacting; she is fucked because of how she's broken her word to the other kings, by taking up with another man after her husband died. So I think I read that moment as like, well, Aeneas is hardening his heart. And part of what's so
Right.
moving about it is that I do get, Kirke's perspective, Circe's perspective. I do get Dido's perspective. And I even may sympathize with them in moments. And it's not solvable morally. Like, none of those things gets
Right. Right. Right.
resolved. And I think,
Yes.
and then to learn more about the interpretation is sort of like, it it might garnish my understanding, but it doesn't change that feeling of the
Right.
terrible, irreconcilability of these different needs and choices.
I mean, I think like
That's my dowsing rod reading versus what I'm probably
yeah. So
unfairly
like
calling a decoder read
what
reading.
we're
Decoder read.
confronted by here is like, I mean, your quote unquote Dowsing rod interpretation is very dramaturgical, right? Like it's very much in caught up with the emotional response of imagining the minds of the
Yeah,
characters.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Ryan's is very much a kind of philosophical interest in what the poet is advising. And my response is that I am intuitively closer to you. I don't particularly understand this idea that poets are supposed to be like great philosophers and should give out advice. I mean, even if Homer was proposing this, like it's a nice intellectual key. I don't particularly think it's much. It doesn't seem to me couched within the examples given in the Odyssey, particularly a philosophically interesting concept
And
for what like
I'm not giving doing justice to
sure,
that
sure,
reading
sure,
because there's so much more to it,
yes,
and these people are actually reading Greek, and so they know, there's much
right.
more to it than the little, cursory
Sure.
treatment I
I,
gave.
I, I must admit I'm intuitively suspicious of this entire thinking. I mean, intuitively, I've always interpreted Homer as an absurdist, and so this idea that actually Homer is attempting to show us. I mean, what does Matthew Arnold say that Homer is? He gives several traits of what Homer should be, and one of them is noble. And I always found this one bizarre. I don't, especially the Iliad, I don't think is noble at all. The Iliad is war carnage, and the Odyssey is an adventure story that like depicts the nightmares of human beings. And what I've always found strange in these people is that like what I always find worth in poets is two things that like well no, it's one thing, which is that they have placed into language the evocation of a thing. But I wouldn't say that that means they're philosophical. I'm more interested in
Yeah.
the evocation of human psychology or human experience than I am in being like, and what lesson can I learn from Homer's schema? That just seems like if I want to learn a lesson, then I'll go and read philosophy. Like this entire idea that Homer's trying to provide us with a schematic understanding of human existence, it doesn't just seem to me wrong. It seems to me to completely misunderstand what the artist is doing. The artist
And
isn't
again, I want
providing.
to say like that, like simply saying like Homer's trying to teach us a lesson is not
Sure, sure.
does
This is
not
me
does
tilting at
not come close to
windmills. I'm
exhausting or adequately representing any of these arguments. But yeah,
right, right, right. And yeah, this is me tilting at windmills. I haven't read Ryan's article, so yeah, this is me attacking the
you
phantoms we have
should.
evoked.
It is really brilliant.
Oh, I mean, is it online?
It will.
Can you
So
email
actually,
me?
because I was going to say it will be published, but you won't be able to read that edition. So I bet he would.
Okay,
Yeah, I
please
bet he
email me
wouldn't
it.
mind if I just send you a copy. I'll
Oh
check.
no,
I'll check with
I'd
him. But
love
yeah,
to read it. I'd love to read it.
um,
But no, don't take this as me attacking Ryan personally. This
yeah,
is me
yeah.
attacking, a certain vibe that's been inspired by this conversation. But obviously, yes, as you say, I really don't know this article, so this is not me at all attacking Ryan's learning, and it is a good idea. It is a good idea. I must say, and speaking about how I respond to this, because I honestly, my response is that I don't separate emotion from intellect. Like, I think maybe in some poems my emotional response is faster than my purely intellectual response, but I literally find it pretty hard to separate the difference between my intellectual response and my emotional response. If I have an intellectual response to something, let me rephrase. If I have an intellectual response to a piece of art, and only a piece of linguistic art, that's the main art I can access, that intellectual response will almost immediately inspire an emotional response. And therefore, I really can't pull the two apart. I will say that I normally respond emotionally and intellectually to either the evocative power of the language or the evocative psychological power of the language. And
Hmm.
in this way, I'm probably closer to you than simply responding intellectually to like not even just a moral, but just an ideational prompt. I'm much more interested in either the way language embodies event or the way language embodies psychology, not the way
Yeah.
in language embodies ideation or didactic philosophical point. That interests me less. So I guess I do read more with a dowsing rod. I think I'm more in your style. But I find it hard because yes, as I say, I really can't like if a piece of language enthralls me and emotionally stirs me, then I will read it repeatedly and I guess I would then be able to glean its conceptual meaning. But certainly the emotional interest, enjoyment, pleasure, and fascination, which I think is intellectual in its own way, comes first than me first being like, what does this mean word by word? I mean, it's one when I first read Geoffrey Hill's poems, I barely understood half like any of them,
Yeah, yeah.
but they created an emotional effect in me that made me obsessively reread them. And I enjoyed them and was fascinated by them and moved by them in various emotional ways so intensely that it didn't matter much to me that I wasn't getting like 80% of his references. Like they still evoked more than just pleasure, they evoked sadness, mourning, joy, whatever. They evoked various emotional responses in me, and that came before any particular conceptual meaning was like clearly laid out in my mind.
It may be that, if you like with metal detectors, you can adjust, sensitivity, you can adjust sort of what they're like, or like, radio tuners, you can tweak what they're listening for. And I
Yeah.
think, dowsing rods are sticks. So you can't, they don't have a dial you can adjust on the side.
Yeah.
But I do think that, yeah, like probably, I think broadly you and I have a similar pattern of reading, but you're tuned to a slightly different frequency or to a slightly different like
Yeah.
texture. Like you may be at a finer texture and I'm at a coarser one or something like this.
Well, I think that's to underpraise yourself and overpraise me, but I think, yeah, that's certainly, I think, yes, we are alike in method, if not in frequency.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
well,
I mean,
to put it in different terms, like I think we both respond to language and psychology, but not at all in the same proportion,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's a good way of putting it.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, another way, because I do think there's, and the new critics use drama and the dramatic framing as a way to think about reading poems, and I do think I have, like, another way to think about this would be that I'm always, the concept of house right and house left, like
Yeah.
versus stage right and stage left.
Right, 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 right.
So house right is at the opposite of stage right because you're facing it
Yeah,
the other
yeah.
direction. So for me, I'm always reading a play from the house. So,
Mm,
like, there is a house right and a house left, and what's off stage I can't
yes.
see, and what happens in the next scene I can't see. And I
Yes.
kind of read poems in the same way and stories in the same way. And I think there are people
Mm,
who read from the wings, where they've got the whole script on offer and they know
yeah,
everything all at once in a godlike
yeah,
fashion. But I'm
right.
always reading in a man-like fashion, I suppose. So
An
which
Odysseus-like
I think has
fashion. Yeah.
limitations. Like I don't think one of those is better than the other. I just think I know one feels much more natural to me.
Mm, no, no, for sure.
All right, I think
Okay,
my
well,
voice might be officially
yes,
toast. That was my conversation with Cameron. As I said, I'm going to reread the Eliza Gonzalez poem. I did quite like this one. This is Failed Essay on Privilege by Eliza Gonzalez, and it originally was published in The New Yorker in 2019. I came from something popularly known as nothing, and in the coming I got a lot. My parents didn't speak money, didn't speak college. Still, I went to Yale. For a while, I tried to condemn. I wrote, "Let me introduce you to evil." Still, I was a guest there. I made myself at home. And I know a fine shoe when I see one. And I know to be sincerely sorry for those people's problems. I know to want nothing more than it would be so nice to have. And I confess I'll never hate what I've been given as much as I wish I could. Still, I thought I of all people understood Aristotle. What is and isn't a good life? Because I wrote, privilege is an aggressive form of amnesia. I left a house with no heat. I left the habit of hunger. I left a room I shared with 7 brothers and sisters I also left. Even the good is regrettable, or at least sometimes should be regretted. Yet to hate myself is not to absolve her. I paid so much for wisdom. And look at all of this. Look at all I have. So that was Failed Essay on Privilege by Eliza Gonzalez. I spoke a few weeks ago about a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks called A Sunset of the City, with the little sort of subheading Kathleen Eileen. And I mentioned that I thought this dramatic monologue by a kind of a fading unhappy housewife felt like it might have inspired the later, slightly later poem Next Day by Randall Jarrell, which is one of my very favorites. In turn, I was thinking about that last line that I mentioned to Cameron that I quite like in this poem, and look at all of this, look at all I have, as a place to break off. And she breaks off with an M dash at the end there instead of a period. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was that made me like that so much, but I think part of it, at least, is that it is an echo from Next Day. I don't know if, it is, this poem is a kind of a taking stock poem, a looking at your life and assessing what it all amounts to, morally and experientially, which is also the case for Next Day. But, I don't know if that's a poem Eliza Gonzalez knows. It is certainly, it's one of my very favorites, so it's kind of indelible in my mind. But I thought I would just read the very end of that poem, because it did very much come to mind when I finally when that phrase locked into place. So Next Day is a poem, among other things, in which the speaker has recently come from the funeral of a friend. This is the day after the funeral, and she is remembering that friend. And at the very end of the poem, she says, "As I think of her, I hear her telling me how young I seem. I am exceptional. I think of all I have. But really, no one is exceptional. No one has anything. I'm anybody. I stand beside my grave, confused with my life. That is commonplace and solitary. How young I seem, I am exceptional. I think of all I have. Look at all of this. Look at all I have." I don't know. Given that that's sort of the penultimate turn in the poem, and of course after that she acknowledges how naive that perspective is. It feels like maybe a subtle undercutting by Gonzalez. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is something she intends or not, but I heard it, if nothing else. And again, I like to point out these echoes, not because I think there's anything wrong with them. I think they're lovely. I do it all the time in my own poetry, and it feels like it's part of what connects us all as poets. We all share this not perfectly in common, but heavily overlapping landscape of a poetic language that we know. So that was the main feed. On The Secret Show, we talk about slang, who gets to use slang, what all the new slang means, how slang shifts over time, and how and if slang should show up in poetry. It was a lot of fun talking with him about that. And so you can hear that at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Go there, put your email address in, and I will give you a week's access for free. After that, it's really fucking cheap. You can, if you have a little extra income, you can sign up to become a motherfucker of the arts. It costs a little more every week, and it makes a big difference. And if you would really like to listen, but you can't afford to, then write me a note at sleerickets@gmail.com, and I will hook you up. And again, people do actually take both of these options. People opt to pay a little more, and they opt to ask for a break, and I'm happy to have you all. You can also, if you sign up for The Secret Show, you can submit a poem to Listener Crit, and Cameron and I, or Alice and I, will talk about it, give it a frank and anonymous critique on the show. If you have any questions or comments about any of this, you can reach me at sleerickets@gmail.com, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.